This is Secret Life of Symbols.
First of all, what we are talking about when I say the dawn of a new day, it's a catchphrase that means something to powerful people in the world that we're not supposed to know anything about. Like George Carlin said, it's a big club and you ain't in it. But if you were in the big club, you would already know what that catchphrase, dawn of a new day, really means. The sun in its rising brings light into the world. And so it became a very powerful symbol for secret societies, especially Freemasonry, to give the idea that they're bringing light into the world. And that's what the sun does. One half of the earth is in darkness and sleeping while the sun is moving across the earth and waking people up. And so it's a war going on in heaven continually between light and darkness. The sun has always symbolized not only light for mankind to see his way each day, but more importantly, intellectual and spiritual enlightenment of the inner soul and the mind of mankind. So therefore, the sun has always been used for newspapers and magazines that are bringing new ideas and new concepts. So we see so many newspapers and magazines carry the word the sun. The New York Sun, the Sunday Sun Times, Sun Sentinel, the heart of your community is the sun. So we see that the idea of the sun is in almost all newspapers around the world. Why? Because the sun brings light into the world, where these magazines are trailing on that idea that they're bringing light and intellectual enlightenment to the world. Here we have the idea of the sun rising between two mountains, and this is a very important symbol, the sun rising between two mountains. Here we see on a ring, the sun rising between the mountains of the east. There's a sensational amount of material on the idea of the sun rising between two mountains. And many of the presidents of the United States have said that and used and said publicly that they see themselves as representing the sun rising between two mountains, between the mountains of the east. Well, here we have British Columbia with the sun rising behind the mountains. Here's the Lady Liberty walking toward the mountain, and you'll see the sun rising. This particular coin in America is called the Dawn of a New Day coin, where the sun is rising on a new time, a new day. Now, the Soviet Communist World Movement, when it took over Russia, there were many different smaller countries in Russia, and they all had to accept the idea of the sun rising behind the mountains. And here you will see the idea is always the same thing, the sun rising behind the mountains of the east. And we see it today in all of our advertisements. Here on a stamp in America, we have a stamp which is almost identical to the eagle which is used by the Nazi Party. It looks like a Nazi fascist symbol. And you'll see the sun rising between the two pyramids of the two mountains. Now, in churches and religions in general, you will see the Sermon on the Mountain, the sun rising behind the mountain, and stained glass windows in churches. Here's a church in England, and the altar has the sun rising between two mountains. You will see it all around the world, this general idea of the sun rising behind the mountains. But what's important about this is that this is an Illuminati, secret society symbol, which then begins to show you how pervasive the Illuminati and the secret societies are in world religions and world government and world finance. Even in the Islamic world, they still have the same symbol as we do. Basically, it means the two mountains goes back to the ancient Egyptian with the two statues, and that welcomes the sun each morning. And there were two large statues, and when the sun came up in front of them. The rising sun of the morning is called the dawn. So when spirituality and intellectual enlightenment comes into your heart and your mind, we say things like, oh, it just dawned on me, what you were saying. Oh, that just dawned on me. Dawn implies the sun has finally brought light into your life, and you see now something you didn't see before. If you can go back to Christian New Dawn and do some research on that, you will see that Easter is referred to as a new dawn when the sun is rising again. Even in the Kabbalah, there's an article about the Kabbalah, talks about the fragrance of Eden, where the one who is caught between the suns of a dying and a dawning day. Watch the way this term, new dawn and dawn of a new day, keeps playing itself into all the political rhetoric going on, all the political speeches. Politicians are using this term. Bush sees a bright dawn emerging. Brown calls for a new world order. Here, the American Catholic Weekly magazine calls it a new world coming. A congressional record, the proceedings and debates of the 76th Congress. And here it basically says, let me call your attention to the fact that on the reverse of the Great Seal of the United States, which appears on our dollar bills, you will find the exact symbol of the British Israel World Federation movement. This symbol is also carried on literature of other organizations promoting a world government and a world religion. And at the bottom of the circle surrounding the pyramid, you will find the wording, Novus Ordo Seclorum, which is the new order that was advocated by Clinton Roosevelt several hundred years ago, and recently by the book Philip Drew, and is now being followed in this government, the United States, by the executive. The book is called Philip Drew. That really explains what is all of this symbolism means. It was written by a Colonel Edward Mandell House, and he was a very close confidant of President Woodrow Wilson. Edward Mandell House wrote a book about his ideas about world government. And here is the President Woodrow Wilson. And on the left-hand side, you will see Woodrow Wilson's friend, Colonel Edward Mandell House, who incidentally happened to be a member of the Illuminati. And here is Colonel Mandell House. Here he is with his wife in England. Here in the table of contents, you will see one of the chapters is a prophet of a new day. Another chapter was the exalted conspirators. The administration of the Republic, talking about a new administration here in America for the Republic. Drew outlines his intentions, a new era in Washington. And another chapter was called An International Crisis. And another one was the reform of the judiciary, a new code of laws for America. We can see that there's already a long time ago, at the time of the First World War, there was already a conspiratorial apparatus coming out of England to set a whole new agenda for America. And in the book, The Masonic Orders of Fraternity, written by Manly Palmer Hall, he's talking about the Illuminati and the secret societies, and he said these were the men of towardness, those sons of tomorrow, whose symbol was a blazing sun rising over the mountains of the east. And while it is difficult to trace the elements of a pattern never intended to be obvious to start with, the broad shape of a design is dimly apparent, an invisible empire taking over the world. An invisible empire which was not supposed to be understood to start with. But if you really study it, you begin to see that there is a conspiratorial apparatus to guide the destiny of America. And they were the men of towardness. Here we have the men of towardness, building a new world. George Bush and the communist leader. Here we have a new order of the nations. This was published by the United States military. Here's another book called America and the New Order, back in 1949. Here's New York, and then New York is referred to as the Empire State, which is the new British Empire, or the new actually Roman Empire. And so the new empire is here in New York. So New York is a center for incredible treason and all kinds of secret societies and money and all kinds of political machinations are going on in New York against the American Republic. We begin to see that all of this is connected behind the scenes by secret societies that want to be the directors of our destiny as a country and as a people. We need to look at a book by a man named James Billington. He wrote a book called Fire in the Minds of Men. James Billington is probably one of the finest historians America has ever been able to produce. James Billington today is the chief librarian for the Library of Congress. He is considered to be a master historian around. He's taught history in England and America, throughout the world. He's an incredible writer, fascinating his views on the ancient history and the history of the world today. He wrote a book called Fire in the Minds of Men, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. And in it, he explains all of the machinations going on in the minds of the guys who are putting this conspiracy together to overthrow the United States. In the introduction, he explains something very important. This is the introduction, one of the introduction pages, where James Billington says, quote, "A recent mythic model for revolutionaries, early romantics, and young Karl Marx, and the Russians of Lenin's time was Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods for the use of mankind. The Promethean faith of revolutionaries resembles in many respects the general modern belief that science would lead men out of darkness into light. But there was also a more pointed millennial assumption that on the new day that was dawning, the sun would never set. Early during the French upheaval, or the French Revolution, was born the idea of a solar myth of revolution, suggesting that the sun was rising on a new era for the world, in which darkness would be vanished forever. The image was implanted at a level of consciousness that simultaneously interpreted something real and produced a new reality. The new reality that these secret societies in the French Revolution, what they sought was a radically secular and stringently simple idea. The idea was not the balanced complexity of a new American federation, but the occult simplicity of its great seal on the back on the top of the pyramid over the words Novus Ordo Seclorum. What he's saying is that Prometheus was a favorite of the ancient gods with the Illuminati because he brought light into the world. And so today at Rockefeller Center, the main picture and the main thing in the Rockefeller Center is Prometheus, who stole fire from God. Here we have the footnotes for the introduction, where you will see that the idea for the revolution, they talk about back in the 1800s, they talk about the year 2000 in New York. And I think that's interesting. As far back as the 1880s, they were talking about the revolution in New York in the year 2000. Well, that's what happened in about 2000 was 9/11. This begins to imply that there's a very powerful secret society working behind the world governments to overthrow the United States, and that 9/11 was part of it. Here's another footnote. In the back of the book, it says, even speculation about the year 2000 began not with the futurologists in 1960, but the dynamic work written back in the 1780s. The same figure who invented the word communist. The very idea of communism back in the 1780s, They talked about New York in the year 2000 would be a time when the whole government of America would be overtaken and overthrown. Well, it was. 9/11 has destroyed the whole concept of a freedom-loving constitutional republic. But most people are not aware of any of this.
This is Secret Life of Symbols.